Hi, Church Faith. Good to be again with you, studying the Word of God. As you know, we've been going through different stages of the end of the world, the rapture, the Antichrist, the catching away of the church, some of the signs that we were reviewing that tell us when the end of the world's coming, the last 7 years of God's dealing with the world. And today we're going to look in Revelations chapter 12, and we're going to see the whole purpose behind the last 7 years of the end of this age. In Revelations chapter 12, in verse 1, it says, "And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth, and pain to be delivered. Then there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his head. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child, as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up unto God, and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath the place prepared of God, that they should feed her 1,260 days." So there we have the 3.5 years again that it talks about. And this is talking about Israel, the woman with the 12 stars, the 12 stars around her head, or the crown of 12 stars, represent the 12 tribes of Israel. It represents Israel giving birth to Jesus, the Savior, and that the dragon was ready to devour her child. And we know that as soon as Jesus was born, that Herod tried to kill him. And that shows us the motivation between an earthly king was not entirely his motivation, but it was this dragon, which is the devil. The dragon was motivating this earthly king to murder a child. So we see that not only does God have influence in this world and moves in the governments of men, but the devil as well has his people, and he rules and he moves in the kingdoms. And so this devil, this dragon, it mentions in verse 3 that this dragon had 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head. And we're going to see that same kind of vision that Daniel saw, and as well in verse 13, we're going to see that this is the nation states that the Antichrist is over, and that he hates Israel and he hates Jesus. He wants to devour this child. But Israel is going to be taken care of in verse 6 for 1,260 days. So Israel's going to be taken care of for 3.5 years, while the Antichrist and his minions are devouring or trying to devour this world. And so we see in verse 9, "And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceives the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And heard a loud voice in heaven, saying, Now is come salvation, strength, and the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Christ, for the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night." There's also it's talking about the whole 3.5 years, that at the end of it, the accuser of the brethren, the devil, is cast down when he tries to go up against God in heaven itself. But he is cast down, and he is defeated by God himself. And so let's turn now to chapter 13 and verse 1. And it says, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and his great authority. So this beast that rises out of the sea, when it says a beast rising out of the sea is representative of peoples, nations, Gentile nations. This beast is going to be rising up out of the peoples of the world, and particularly the old Roman Empire. And that's very important and is a key part of understanding the end times. The old Roman Empire, the nations that they ruled over, are going to once again join together. And it's kind of like the European Union now, who has their own coinage and their own money, and they're trying to be like the United States to kind of compete against us and compete against the world. It's going to be pretty much all of those states and all the ones that used to be the old Roman Empire. And we have the names of those states, of those countries. And it says that he has 7 heads, 10 horns are upon his horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns. The 7 heads are representative of 7 different nations. And the 10 horns, the horns are representative of the leaders of those nations. And these nations are going to give their power unto the beast. The beast, as we've learned, is going to be called the Antichrist. He is going to be a political figure who rises up somewhere in the Middle East or somewhere in Europe. And he's going to be leading this great conglomeration of nations in the earth. And they're going to mainly be against God, against Israel. The last 3.5 years of the tribulation really are the devil just trying to destroy God's people, whether they're Christians that became Christians during the tribulation or they are the Jewish people. He's just going to be trying to destroy them. And it says, as we talked about last time in verse 3, and I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. So we said last week that it was like a mini resurrection of being wounded and either dead or appearing to be dead. But he's healed. And the entire world is just amazed at this beast that was wounded and now he's alive. And they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And power was given unto him to continue 42 months. There's the 3.5 years. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And power was given unto him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. So notice, this is not just Europe only, but this beast is given a power and authority to overcome all kindreds, tongues, and nations. So this beast kingdom is going to be ruling the whole earth. He's going to have control of the whole earth. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundations of the world. If any man have an ear to hear, let him hear. And so we see this beast that rises out of the sea, out of the peoples, out of all the tongues and of the nations. He has these 7 heads and 10 horns. So 7 main countries that are following him. And there are 10 leaders that he has control over. And they give power unto him. But it's really the dragon who is Satan himself, who is giving power unto this normal human being who has decided to follow Satan and to be doing his work. Can you imagine? To be born into this earth, a person who could be redeemed, who could accept God and serve him. Instead, you are this famous Antichrist. You are the beast. You are the one that is told about in scriptures as the one that is to come, that will be the very personification of evil. I mean, that would be a terrible thing that you've chosen in this life. And so we see here that this beast is given authority to rule on the earth. You know, I was looking at the regime of Hitler. Hitler in the World War II, if you lived during that time, surely you would have thought he was the beast, because he had every characteristic that the future Antichrist will come, that will come. He had the characteristics of him. If you want to know what he's going to kind of look like and act like and move like, Hitler is a perfect type of the Antichrist. And I believe Hitler was like a forerunner, like a practice run of what this future leader would look like. As you know, Hitler, it didn't take long. Within 4 years, they had 12 million people in forced labor. You know, the last three and a half years, we think, well, that's not much time for things to happen. Well, Hitler, within 4 years, had 12 million people enslaved under his total control, building railways and ammunition dumps and bunkers and roads and machines and airplanes and everything to fuel his war machine. And that was just in 4 years. Think about this virus. We said it last week. In a month, in less than a couple of months, the entire world has been altered and shut down. So don't think that it takes years and years for these things to happen. Within a few months, the world can be changed. And Hitler had all of Poland and France and Germany and Hungary, Belgium, and many Russians were taken over and controlled. And practically every Jew in Germany was either imprisoned or killed or driven out of Germany. So many things can happen within a short amount of time. We see here that in chapter 13, these nations that are going to rise up, that these were nations that Daniel saw in the book of Daniel. I want us to turn into the book of Daniel, chapter 7. I want us to look there, and I want us to see that he saw a lot of these things happening during that time. When he had some visions in Daniel chapter 7, it says in verse 1, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel spoke and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, 4 winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings, and I beheld till the wings were plucked, and it was lifted from the earth, and made to stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And another beast, a second like to a bear, and it raised itself up on one side, and had 3 ribs in its mouth of it between the teeth, and they said unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I beheld, and another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night vision, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, strong and exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was different from all the other beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. And I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. So Daniel sees these visions, and you have to realize that in prophecy, when God is showing us the future, we don't necessarily know these things by name, but he's using animals, and he's using different symbols and things to represent these nations that would rise up. Some people, America is represented by the eagle, to a lot of people, or the Statue of Liberty. Perhaps if Daniel saw America, he would say something like the eagle. They, look like an eagle, or something like that. And so these nations that he saw, it's exactly like we saw in Revelation chapter 13, especially the one in verse 7, that this fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, that it was different from all the other ones. And it's this kingdom that we are waiting for, this last kingdom on the earth. I want us to look now in Daniel chapter 2, and what I want us to see is, let's go to this chart that we have over here. In Daniel chapter 2, we see, and don't laugh at my crude drawing there. We're not all blessed to draw very well or anything like that, but we see in Daniel chapter 2, and we see in verse 1 that the king Nebuchadnezzar dreamed a dream. And again, God is going to speak to Daniel about the end times through these dreams. It says, he dreamed a dream, and his spirit was troubled, and a sleep brake from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians, astrologers. Anyway, he asked them all, what is the interpretation of this dream? Now, I want us to look there on this image. It's supposed to be an image of what he saw. And what he saw was this statue. And this statue, the head of the statue was of gold. And then he saw that the breast was of silver. And then the thighs were of brass, and the legs were of iron. Okay, we look here that Daniel is going to give the interpretation of what this king saw. And it says in verse 36, Daniel 2:36, this is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven has he given into your hand, and has made thee ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. And so we see on this image that the king that was having the dream was the head of gold, the Babylonian kingdom. This kingdom was now in charge of that area of the Middle East. And they came into power there, you see, in 605 to 539. And Daniel was captured by this kingdom. And then he goes on to say, and after this shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, forasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and subdues all things. Now, so this head of this statue, the next kingdom that was to come was the Persian kingdom. And it was silver. If you notice, the first one was gold, the second one's silver. It's not as beautiful, not as refined. It's a lesser metal. And then the kingdom of Greece which was even not as a refined, or it was even a lesser metal, it was more brutal, was the thighs of brass. And then the Roman kingdom, which was represented by the legs of iron. And as you know, Rome was a brutal kingdom that was strong and crushed everything in its path. I mean, the neat thing about this was that Daniel was seeing this before all these things came to pass. Now, I want you to notice in verse 42, as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. If you look on that image, you see the 2 feet. Obviously, there's 10 toes. That's the 10 heads that we read about in Revelations 13. The 10 nations. You see, Rome was basically Italian. It was Italy. It conquered many other nations, and many other nations could be part of the Roman Empire, but it was mainly, Italian. This last kingdom, it says it's going to be mixed with clay. In other words, it's going to be the Roman Empire, but it's going to be not as pure. It's not going to be just Romans or just Italians. It's going to be mixed with people. And that's why the clay is there. And notice it's 10 nations. And that's what we're going to see in the end of the world here. We're going to see these nations that rise up. And they're going to be under the rule of the Antichrist. And that is going to be the last kingdom on the earth of men. It says in verse 43, and whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. See, different seed, different men. But they shall not cleave to one another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And it'd be like now, the European Union. You have Britain, you have Germany, you have France, all these nations that are together, but they are not together. They are together, but they don't mix together really. They're just in it for their own benefit. And that's what this iron and clay mixture represent. They're different nations, and they're together for their own benefit, but they're of different races and different ideas. And notice in verse 44, in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, that it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. So you see that this kingdom of clay and iron will be replaced by the kingdom of God. And that's at the end of the 7-year tribulation, when God's kingdom comes and Jesus comes on his white horse to set up the kingdom of God, which shall stand forever. And in the image, if we go back to Daniel chapter 2, if we see in verse 31, thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. The image head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. You saw till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and clay, and broke them to pieces. Now notice in that 34 it says that he saw this stone that was not cut with hands, which is representative of what God does and man, not what man can do. And this stone hit this image and broke it, which represents Christ breaking the power of the Antichrist government at that time. And in verse 35, the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces and became like chaff of the summer threshing floor, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. That is the kingdom of Jesus Christ coming in the very last days and destroying this antichrist kingdom. Praise God. Isn't that's wonderful news? And that's when the Lord will set up his kingdom on this earth, and the Lord shall reign forever and ever. I want us to see a continuation of that vision that king had, that golden statue. Daniel also had a vision himself. In Daniel 8:1, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. So Daniel is also having a vision. And then we jump over to verse 16 for the interpretation. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of Eli, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, Understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Now as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground. But he touched me and set me up upright. And he said, Behold, I will make you know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. For at that time appointed the end shall be. The ram which you saw, having 2 horns, are the kings of Media and Persia. And remember on that image, if we'll look on that image, the 2 breasts, the 2 arms, the 2 shoulders were the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. And Daniel is seeing it in a different form of this rough goat, of this horns. And then we look back in verse 21, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia. And if you look in history, you see there on the image the thighs where the thighs of brass were Greece. If you look in history, this is exactly the kingdoms that overtook Israel. Remember, these were not all the kingdoms of the earth. These were the only ones that had dealings with Israel, who conquered Israel. And Daniel is seeing history. That's what's amazing about this book, is that he was at he was in the Babylonian kingdom, so he saw the head of gold, obviously. And then he saw the Mede and the Persians come. But he was not around for the Grecian kingdom. And yet that's the next kingdom, Alexander the Great, who came and conquered Israel and all the nations back then. He said that this rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. And one of the interesting things is that Alexander the Great did not have any children, but he had 4 generals that he gave his kingdom to, and they divided the kingdoms into four kingdoms, and they each ruled one. And it's saying exactly that right here. 4 stood up. And it says, and in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressions are come to a full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. And it's out of one of those kingdoms that this Antichrist is going to rise up. And if we notice there, it says that he is going to be a man of fierce countenance. And one thing interesting about the Antichrist is he's going to look fierce. He's not going to look like a delicate type person. He's going to look very aggressive. And, again, we go back to a Hitler type of person. Hitler looked very aggressive. He did not look kind. He did not look soft. He looked very stern and very fierce. And that's exactly what the Antichrist is going to be like. And then it says he has understanding of dark sentences. And some have come to interpret that as somebody who is in the occult. Or riddles, somebody that can understand riddles. We're not really sure exactly what that would be. And then we see in verse 24, And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper, and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart. So we look there in verse 25. It says, and through his policy, through his cunning and through his deceit, he shall prosper. So one thing that is going to really speak about this Antichrist, one quality that's going to really stand out, is he's going to be very deceitful, very tricky. I mean, if you think of Satan as a liar and a deceitful person, he's going to be just flowing through this Antichrist perfectly. And this Antichrist is going to be just smooth talking and just lying through his teeth. Because remember how this Antichrist brokers some peace agreement. It says he brokers it for 1 week for the 7 years, and in the middle of the week he breaks it. We believe that he's probably somebody who makes a peace agreement in Israel with all the troubles and turmoils over there. But everything he says is a lie. Everything. And it says, and in verse 25, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. That word peace is ease. It says it like this, and in their ease shall he destroy many. These people that are going to think that he is the second coming of Christ, that he is literally the second coming of Christ, and they're going to be so at ease and so peaceful, thinking that everything is going great. And then in the middle of the 7 years, and then after 3.5 years, he's going to reveal who he is, and everybody's going to be shocked. I want us to look in Daniel chapter 8 and verse 9. It says, and this is verse 8, Daniel 8:8. This is the Grecian kingdom. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones. And in history, the great horn was Alexander the Great, which was a wonderful military genius. He had no children, but when he was broken, when he died, 4 notable ones towards the 4 winds of the earth, his 4 generals rose up and ruled his kingdom. And out of one of them came forth a little horn. That little horn is known as the Antichrist. Starts out as a little horn, nobody special, but grows in power with the abilities of the devil himself. So out of one of those kingdoms that one of these Greek generals was running, the little horn, or the Antichrist, shall rise from that place, which waxed exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. So whichever general ruled towards the pleasant land, which was Israel, and toward the east, this general, we have his name was Seleucus. He ruled there, and he ruled in Syria. And so perhaps this person, this Antichrist that is going to arise one day, will have something to do with Syria. Now we believe that he will be a Jewish person, because we see here as well in Daniel chapter 11 and verse 37. It's talking about this Antichrist. It says, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers. So this Antichrist, and notice how it has the God of his fathers. God is singular, which at the time this was written would only represent Israel. And this is how Israel would talk. You'd be talking about a Jewish person. Many of the nations back then, they believed in many gods, including the Roman Empire and all of them. So this person will not regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. And so this Antichrist will not regard the God of his father, so he's going to be somebody that is probably Jewish, has something to do with Syria, because it's that area that this general ruled, that it says that horn comes out of. And it also says in verse 38, but in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold, silver, and with precious. So he's a person who honors the God of forces, a military person. So this Antichrist is not going to be a silly person, or a person that's, real whimsical. He's going to have fierce features and countenance. He's going to speak like a Hitler with great. He's going to given a great mouth and a great. He's going to speak great sentences. If you've ever seen speeches of Hitler's, where he has the whole crowd mesmerized and he's hollering and yelling, and he's going to be a god. He's going to worship the God of forces. He's going to honor this God of force, a God of military might. So he's going to be a military type person. So this starts to narrow down what kind of person this is going to be. Jewish, because it says here, does not honor the God of his fathers. And again, that's how you would talk about a Jewish person. And plus, he's going to be a person that Israel is going to accept. And probably the one who gets their temple built. And so they're going to really think that he is a Messiah, probably like a Jesus figure. And if he wasn't Jewish, obviously they wouldn't accept him in that way. But he doesn't reveal any of these things. I mean, he will reveal he's a military man. That's not bad. People won't look down on that. But he's not going to reveal that he's not religious and that he's not serving God in any way until the 3.5 years when he reveals to the world that he's God. He's going to want to be worshipped. And so we see he comes as a little horn, something that is small, and he rises to power. He's from one of those 4 kingdoms that Alexander the Great gave to his generals, and we see that it's the one that ruled towards the pleasant land, which was Syria, as well as that other area, Israel. And we see here that he's going to be a person who is very military minded, and he's going to be just very strong in all that he's doing. In Revelations, we go Revelations 13. We see again this beast rises up with 7 heads, 10 horns. And then we see in verse 2, and the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him power. Now each one of these animals represented these kingdoms that had taken over Israel. And these kingdoms will probably be the main kingdoms that are leading the way during this last time of the earth, before the great tribulation and the end of the world. And some of these kingdoms are not kingdoms that are dominating in any way right now. So these could also be a sign when these kingdoms start rising up again in some form. This could also be a sign the end is coming. Now let's see the beast in verse 2. It says the first one was like a leopard. We know from Daniel that leopard was the Greek Empire. The Greek Empire right now is nothing at all. Greece is nothing. So perhaps if we see that empire rising up again, it's a sign. The next one, which he saw, was the feet of a bear. The bear represents the Medes and the Persians, which was Iran and Turkey. Who could ever envision that Iran and Turkey would be anything? Even though right now Turkey is rising up in the world. But Iran certainly is not. It wants to, but it's not. So these could also be a sign. It says, and it had the mouth of a lion. The lion is Babylon, which would be Iraq, modern day Iraq. And so these four kingdoms seem to make up the main power, or the main ones of this end time beasts, these kingdoms that rise up. It's very interesting that either they will rise up and be powerful, or through the beast rising up, he will make these particular kingdoms more powerful than any other ones. We don't know. But you can see how the world is still not yet lined up to represent anything that we're reading here. And so let's end this. Let's go to the last part of Revelations 13 and verse 11. And I beheld another beast coming out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And this beast doesn't come out of the sea, it comes out of the earth. And the earth is representative of Israel. You know, they were given the land, they were given this ground. They were the only nation that God gave this particular piece of ground and made a big deal of this, of Israel. I'm giving you the promised land. And so this beast that rises up has two horns like a lamb, which is representative of Jesus, but it speaks as a dragon. This beast is the other character that is going to be on the earth. First, you have the Antichrist, who is the political, general, military might. But this one is a religious beast who will rule, who looks like a lamb, but speaks like a dragon. So a very deceitful, evil minister, priest, something that is going to be pushing the religious, false religion of the beast. In verse 12, and he exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and causes the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. So the beast that was killed and was raised up again, he's making everybody worship this beast. And he does great wonders, so that he makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and he deceives them that dwell on the earth by means of the miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beasts, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by the sword and did live. So this beast had a wound by a sword, and yet he lived. And he's telling the world that they should make an image of him. And this beast, or this second beast, this false prophet, is doing miracles in the sight of men and deceiving them. So you can see he's the religious side to this regime. And in verse 15, he had power to give life to the image of the beast. And the image of the beast should speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. So this is complete blasphemy. They make the image and it's moving. This image is moving. We don't know if it's walking or just talking and moving. It's just the weirdest thing you could ever see. The worship of an image is the height of blasphemy to God. It represents man worshiping the works of his hands. It's man worshiping money, man worshiping themselves, their effort. You know, in the Old Testament, when they made images, God's saying those images can't speak, they can't walk, you made them. And so now the devil is making this image to speak, and you have to worship it or you will be killed. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. And we see that, even now when we're faced with this virus, how all business is shut down. And only those that are allowed to be open are open. Well, this is taking it a step further. Only those who worship this image are allowed to get a mark that they are worshipers of this image, and then they will be able to buy and sell. You can imagine the power of this, and you could see how this could easily be done. In a minute, in an instant, the government could send troops and could instantly take over everything and cause us all to have to get some kind of a mark or an image. Again, Hitler, during his reign, he tattooed the different prisoners that would go into the different concentration camps so they could know who they were, whether they were gypsies, whether they were Jewish, whether they were, whatever other nations. They tattooed them, and they had these numbering system. Again, Hitler was a prototype of the Antichrist. And so this mark, which will go on your right hand or your forehead, is going to be some kind of a mark. Probably, of course, not a tattoo. That's too primitive. Nowadays, we have electronic things that can be inserted under the skin. I mean, people are already, they can't wait to develop this and use it. There's people right now that already use it in their factories with their workers. And I read about some guy who put it in his own hands so that his whole house, when he walks to his house, the door opens, the lights turn on, the house, recognizes him and salutes him or welcomes him. So this is already something that is being used already. And then, of course, the famous verse 18, which millions of people have, broken their brains trying to figure out. Here is wisdom. Let him that has understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. So 666. 666. And this number is the number of man. And again, many theologians and ministers have concluded that God, his number is 7. It's a perfect number. It means God's perfection. And 6, meaning that man is under God. Man is not perfected. Man is not perfection. And so this beast uses this number, and this number, who knows what it means? Who knows what it represents? The Bible even makes it sound like we could even count the number of the beast, but I'm not really sure that we can. And so we see all of these events happening in the world, and we still see that there's a lot of time left, that none of these things are lining up yet. But as we said, things could line up very quickly. And so we can't just discount that and say, since none of these things, Greece is not a power, neither is Turkey, neither is, Iran. So these things aren't happening right now, but these things overnight could transpire. So we really can't put a time limit. The main thing to get out of this, and this will be our last lesson on this, even though there's just many, many more to look at, is the last part of that verse. If you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to get a mark in your hand or your forehead, or you had to worship some image, don't do it. The Bible says that if you get this mark in your hand, that you're doomed forever. You can never go to heaven, that you are lost forever, because it's a form of worship. You're worshiping the devil. By this time, we should be gone as Christians. But if you're not a Christian and you hear this message, you do not get this mark, even if it means starving to death. And it says that this mark will be given in the right hand or the forehead. So it's not a card or a credit card. It is a mark on your right hand. It's very specific, or your forehead. So if somebody, some people used to think the Social Security card was the mark of the beast, but it's a card. It's not on your right hand. It's not on your forehead. It has to be specific. But by this time, the rapture has happened, and Christians that are now Christians are not going to be here. But if you're here during this tribulation, you would do better to just die than to receive this mark. Well, I pray that you have been blessed by these services, and the next time we see you will probably be in person. So we have enjoyed bringing these services to you and these messages, and we just pray for you and believe for God's best in your life. Amen.